15. Judd Passarello's house was on the other side of town. Andrea had talked her father, who was driving them to the party, into dropping them off 2 blocks away because having your father drive you to the biggest party of the summer was totally uncool. The sound of heavy metal rumbled across the yard as Jenna and Andrea came up the front walk. Cars were everywhere. They lined both sides of the street and, having long since filled the driveway, spilled over onto the front yard. Kids were outside sitting on car hoods, some smoking, some talking, and a few making out, although most of that was going on inside the cars. Inside the Passarellos' ranch house, bodies were wedged so tightly that Jenna wasn't sure they'd even be able to make it through the front door. She had a childish urge to grab Andrea's hand so they wouldn't get separated. Andrea was standing on tiptoe, squinting and trying to see over people's heads through the haze of smoke that hung over the room. "I don't see him," she shouted over the thundering music. Jenna knew she was talking about Michael. "So now what?" she shouted back. "Let's find the drinks," Andrea said. "I'm thirsty." In the kitchen, they found a large laundry tub filled with ice and cans of soda. Jenna was bending over the tub when she felt someone's warm breath on her neck. She was so surprised to find Jason Friedman standing behind her that she dropped a can of soda on his foot. Jason winced, then picked up the can and set it on top of the refrigerator. "I wouldn't try to open that right now," he said, "unless you want to spend the rest of the evening cleaning the Passarello ceiling." Jenna was sure her pulse rate had reached 200. She took a step back and leaned against the counter for support. Ever since the night she had the panic attack in the movie theater, she had managed to keep Jason at a distance. She went out with him sometimes, but only when she knew they would be with other friends. The rest of the time, she made up what she hoped were plausible excuses. Jason pulled 2 cans of soda from the tub and handed her one. She took it, praying that he wouldn't notice she was shaking. "I was hoping you'd be here." Jason seemed almost shy around her, which only made her feel more awkward. "Want to go outside? The smoke in here is really bothering my eyes." Without actually answering him, Jenna slipped out the sliding glass door that led to a deck. Jason followed. The deck was as crowded as the rest of the house. Jenna began to walk toward the front yard, although she had no idea where she was going, or why. There was no place to sit on the front steps, so they made their way to one of the cars on the lawn and sat on the hood. Jenna tried to open her soda, but her hands were shaking so badly that she couldn't grab the metal tab. So she closed her eyes and concentrated on her breathing. Gradually, the anxiety began to subside. When she opened her eyes, it was to find Jason staring at her, a worried look on his face. He took the can from her and pulled open the tab. "Are you okay?" "Yes," she lied. After an unbearably awkward silence, Jason said, "You know, I've been calling you almost every day and leaving messages on your answering machine." Jenna was struggling to think clearly and was still concentrating hard on her breathing. "You never call back." Jason stared down at his can of soda. "I'm sorry, it's just that—" What could she say? She couldn't tell him how anxious he made her feel. He'd want to know why, and she didn't have an answer for that. Jason raised his hand, as if he were a witness being sworn in. "Never mind. Forget it." "I guess I thought I'd see you at the pool, so I didn't bother. Calling back, I mean," Jenna said. But she suddenly remembered that she hadn't seen him at the pool for over a week, and that, in a way, she had felt relieved. Jason shook his head. "I've been working on my science project. I haven't had much time for the pool." He was looking straight at her. "Or maybe you didn't notice." A flood of mixed emotions welled up in her. "I noticed," she whispered. He took a deep breath, then swallowed. "Man, this is hard." "What?" "Telling you what I'm thinking." "I thought you could tell me just about anything," Jenna said, remembering how they had talked for hours at other parties and on the phone. "This is different." He rolled his can of soda back and forth between his palms. "Why?" "Because it's not about us." Jenna had just managed to calm down. Now her heart began to thump all over again. "What about us?" "That's the thing," he said. "Is there an us?" Jenna forced herself to look into his eyes, his beautiful, soft, gray eyes. Was it true? Did she really feel nothing for him anymore? She wondered what he would say if she told him about the awful effect he'd been having on her. After all, wasn't it kinder than leaving him in the dark? And she might have done just that, told him everything, if Andrea hadn't suddenly come running across the yard, navigating gracefully between cars. "There you are!" she shrieked. "I've been looking for you everywhere." She hopped up on the hood of the car next to Jenna. Her face glowed bright pink. "He's here," she announced. "Where?" Jenna knew full well she was talking about Michael Mackenzie. Okay. Andrea's breath was coming in short, excited bursts. Okay, now don't look. Promise me you won't look, or he'll know. Jenna was aware that Jason was frowning at both of them. She had no idea what was going through his mind, but she secretly prayed he wouldn't think this had anything to do with her recent behavior toward him. Fine, she said. We won't look. He's right across the street in that gray Honda. Andrea made short, jerky motions with her hands. Don't look, don't look. We're not, Jenna said. Calm down. Jason was staring across the street. Isn't that one of the lifeguards from the pool? Yes, Andrea answered, almost breathless. Jason looked over at Jenna. Then he slid off the car. I think I get the picture, he said, clenching and unclenching his fists as he headed back toward the house. As the screen door banged behind Jason, it was all Jenna could do not to run after him. Instead, she told herself that maybe it was better to let him think what he wanted. It meant she wouldn't have to explain anything to him. It was easier this way. What's his problem? Andrea asked. Jenna answered with a silent shrug. Andrea grabbed Jenna's arm. Michael's not with anyone. He's just been sitting there for who knows how long. Why do you think he isn't coming inside? Do you think he's waiting for someone? Do you... Jenna made a timeout sign with her hands. Whoa, slow down. Andrea puffed out her cheeks and covered her eyes with her hand. I'm acting like a complete idiot. Sorry. No, you're not, Jenna assured her. It's just that I've built this whole thing up in my mind, you know, and here he is, sitting right over there, and my heart feels like it's going to fly right out of my chest. She looked over at Jenna. I can't seem to stop shaking. Isn't that the stupidest thing? Jenna glanced across the lawn at the gray Honda and was surprised to find Michael watching her. Goosebumps ran all along her arms. Michael's eyes suddenly widened, as if he had just realized she was looking at him, too. But he turned away before she could be sure. Why don't you go over and talk to him? Jenna suggested. You're kidding. Just walk up there and introduce myself? Jenna noticed Michael was now leaning forward. He had his arms folded on top of his steering wheel, his forehead pressed against his hand. She was reminded of the evening she had watched him on the front steps of the church, knees pulled up to his chest, head bent. She had felt his pain then, and she felt it now. She wished there were some way to offer him comfort. Why not? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. He looks like he could use a friend. Fine. You talk to him. Maybe I will. She stood up, surprising even herself, and marched right over to the Honda. After all, Andrea couldn't go on like this forever. Somebody had to put her out of her misery. It might as well be her best friend. And the truth was, Jenna herself was a little curious about Michael. She wanted to know why he sat on the church steps across from her house almost every evening. Not that she'd come right out and ask him. Still, if Michael and Andrea became friends, then maybe someday Jenna would have an answer to that question. But as Jenna approached the car, she heard the engine roar to life. She had the feeling Michael Mackenzie would have torn right out of his parking space, leaving only the smell of burning rubber in the air, if she hadn't already rested her hand on the edge of the open window. She tried to smile reassuringly, although she wasn't sure why she needed to. You'll probably think this is really dumb, she said, but my friend over there has been wanting to meet you. She nodded in Andrea's direction. Andrea stood stock still as if she were a rabbit facing a hungry wolf. Michael glanced over his shoulder to where Jenna had nodded. I'd like to meet your friend, he said, but not tonight, okay? His voice was thick, slow, as if he were weighing each word. I have to leave right now. I'm meeting someone. Jenna smiled at him. It was a mechanical smile, but she didn't dare show her disappointment. Maybe at the next party. She backed away from the car so that he could pull out. When she risked turning around, she saw that Andrea was no longer in sight, but standing on the front steps of the Passarello's house, watching her intently, watching the entire scene between her and Michael Mackenzie, was Amy Ruggiero.